What if I told you that what you're experiencing right now isn't a coincidence? What if this inner weariness, this strange feeling of finality, is actually the beginning of something much bigger? Many people think that breakthroughs come with obvious signs, clear answers, and wide-open doors. But when Allah prepares something immense, He often begins by disorienting you, by making you let go of what you thought was essential, by making you wait longer than expected. If you feel that your life is changing without knowing in what direction, if you have the feeling that something is brewing, but nothing is yet visible, then this message didn't reach you by chance. Stay attentive, because what comes next could completely transform how you see your trial and your deliverance. There are times in life when silence becomes deafening. Not a peaceful silence, a heavy silence, laden with questions you no longer dare to ask. You wake up each day with the feeling that something should have already changed. You continue to do what you know is right. You make invisible efforts. You multiply your inner prayers, sometimes without words, just with this weight in your chest. And yet, nothing seems to answer. This kind of silence can make even the most sincere hearts doubt. It makes no noise, but it tests you deeply. It forces you to look within yourself, to the places you've avoided for too long, to where your fears, your attachments, your secret expectations reside. But this silence is not an absence. It is not abandonment. It is a different kind of presence, more subtle, more demanding. When Allah brings silence, it is never to empty you. It is to free you. Free you from the external noise, from the voices that have influenced you more than you admitted, from the comparisons that made you believe you were behind, from the desires you mistook for spiritual needs. In this silence, many feel disoriented. You no longer know exactly where you are going. You no longer know if what you are doing is enough. You sometimes wonder if you are still on the right path. But what few understand is that this feeling of uncertainty is not a mistake. It is a phase of stripping away. Before a great transformation occurs, the soul must be made receptive. And to be receptive, it must be freed from what burdens it, even from what she's clung to out of spiritual habit. Silence forces you to stop running, to stop measuring your worth by what you receive immediately, to stop seeking validation in visible results. It teaches you something rare, to remain present even when nothing manifests. This is where many give up, not because they lack faith, but because the silence reflects back an image of themselves they'd never truly seen. In this strange stillness, you might feel a particular kind of weariness, not physical, a weariness of the soul, as if you've given so much without seeing anything in return, as if your heart was saying, "I did everything I could, and yet." But what you may not know is that this weariness is often a sign that you're reaching the end of a cycle where you did things with effort, a cycle where you carried more than was truly meant for you. Allah doesn't prepare a breakthrough through noise. He prepares it through inner adjustment. In this silence, He teaches you to listen differently, to no longer wait for spectacular signs, to recognize subtle changes, an intention that is purified, an attachment that weakens, a certainty that begins to emerge for no apparent reason. This silence is not empty. It is full of things that are gently settling in. This is where your heart is realigned, not with what you want, but with what you are ready to receive without it distracting you. Some blessings, if they came too soon, would throw you off balance. They would bolster your ego instead of nourishing your soul. They would distance you without you even realizing it. So silence becomes a protection, a mercy in disguise, a buffer zone between the old you and the one you are becoming. If you feel that time is stretching out, that the days are all the same, that nothing is moving forward on the outside. It's not because your life is frozen, it's because it's being prepared in a dimension you don't control. Silence strips you of impatience. It teaches you to trust without immediate proof. It compels you to remain sincere even when no one is watching, even when nothing rewards you. And those who remain silent, those who don't turn away when there's no quick response, they then experience something profoundly destabilizing. Because what happens after this kind of silence is never what they imagined, and calls into question everything they thought they knew about how Allah works in a life. Look honestly at what has happened in your life recently. Not what you show to others, not what you explain with stock phrases, but what truly crumbled inside. There was that door that slammed shut when you were convinced it was finally about to open. That project you pursued with sincerity, energy, and hope that came to a screeching halt. That relationship that seemed stable, almost inevitable, that changed without warning. And above all, that question that flashed through your mind like a silent shock. Why now, when I was ready? This precise moment is crucial, because it often marks the beginning of a transformation that few people recognize. When everything falls apart without warning, the soul enters a zone of profound confusion. You relive every detail, you wonder what you did wrong. You're looking for a mistake, a fault, a lack of wisdom. But what many don't realize is that some breakups aren't punishments, they're removals. Allah sometimes removes things from your life, not because they were inherently bad, but because they had become too small for what was to come. Perhaps you were attached to a version of your life that reassured you, but no longer uplifted you. A comfortable, but limited structure. A framework that gave you a sense of security, while hindering your inner growth. Then the destabilization begins. It doesn't give warning. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't respect your timing. And that's precisely why it hurts. Because you don't have time to prepare yourself emotionally. Because you thought you understood the plan. Because you thought things were finally going in the right direction. But when Allah wants to move you to a new stage, He doesn't simply add, He restructures. And restructuring always involves some form of prior destruction. What you're experiencing may feel like a fall, but in reality, it's often a forced displacement. You're displaced from what was familiar, from what you controlled, from what defined your identity until now. And suddenly, you no longer recognize your own life. The landmarks disappear. The certainties crumble. Even your supplications seem different, heavier, more urgent. This is where the ego suffers the most, because it loved the old structure. It loved knowing what to expect. It loved feeling settled. But the soul begins to breathe differently. Even if you don't feel it yet, even if the pain is overwhelming, something within you is being set free. What seemed like stability was sometimes a disguised limitation. What seemed indispensable was sometimes a silent burden. And what you call loss today may have been an emotional, affective, or spiritual dependence you didn't recognize. Destabilization always reveals a truth. You had grown accustomed to something you thought was eternal when it was only a phase. And when a phase lasts too long, it begins to resemble a destination. Allah never takes anything away from you without reason. But He doesn't always explain why immediately. Because if you understood too soon, you would resist. You would try to repair what was meant to crumble. You would try to keep alive what was meant to die. So He lets chaos do its work. A chaos that forces you to let go, to question your choices, to reconsider what you thought was a given. This chaos isn't there to destroy you. It's there to shatter the illusion that you had arrived. And it's often at this precise moment that the signs begin to appear subtly, not as clear answers, but as unexpected detachments. You begin to cling less, to beg less for things to go back to the way they were, to accept, despite yourself, that something is definitively over. And this painful acceptance is a major key, because what you are about to receive couldn't fit into the old version of your life. There wasn't enough space, not enough inner maturity, not enough detachment. So everything had to change. Even what you loved, even what you believed was necessary, even what you thought was an obvious blessing. This kind of destabilization often happens just before a major transition. But it's so uncomfortable that most people think they're going backward, when in reality, they're already moving forward. And what makes this stage so unsettling is that you don't see any reward yet. Only chaos. Only the ruins of what once was. There are tears no one sees. Not because you're strong, but because you've learned to hide what hurts you. You smile. You reply, "It's okay." You keep moving forward. No one notices the pressure in your chest when you're alone. No one sees this weariness that doesn't go away, even after rest. No one knows how many times you've held back your tears so as not to explain what you yourself can no longer understand. These tears are different. They don't always flow down your cheeks. Sometimes they stay trapped inside, burning, silent. You carry them all day, in your eyes, in your breath, in this constant feeling of being almost at the end, but never completely broken. And yet, you keep going. You keep believing even though your body is tired. You keep hoping even though your heart is heavy. You continue to invoke even when the words come out mechanically, without apparent emotion. And it is precisely there that the truth many ignore lies hidden. The most sincere faith is not that which overflows with joy, it is that which survives in exhaustion. There is a kind of pain that only those who have not given up know. A discreet, deep pain that no longer seeks to be seen. You no longer even have the energy to explain what you feel. You just want it to have meaning. And sometimes you silently wonder, does any of this really matter? Does anyone see what I am going through when no one is looking? What your heart may not yet know is that every unseen tear carries immense weight. Not the weight of weakness, the weight of sincerity. Because these tears are not shed to be noticed. They are poured out because you have nothing left to give but your vulnerability. Those moments when you crumble inside, silently, when you sit alone, staring blankly, when you feel that strange mix of sadness, patience, and waiting. None of this is ignored. Even when you feel like your prayers are hanging in the air. Even when you think you might be asking for too much. Even when you compare your situation to others and wonder why they move forward while you seem stuck. What you are experiencing is a form of silent offering. An offering that few are capable of making. Remaining faithful when their hearts are heavy. There are people who only cry when everything is falling apart. And there are those who cry because they have carried on for too long without seeing the light. And it is often to these people that the answers come in a completely unexpected way. When Allah says, it is time to celebrate, it is not only for what will appear outwardly. It is not only for visible success, healing, or deliverance. It is also for every night you resisted giving up. For every morning you woke up without desire, but with intention. For every time you trusted it when everything inside you screamed the opposite. There are rewards that are not immediate, because they are too profound to be superficial. Sometimes it is not your situation that changes first. It is your heart that is expanded. Your capacity to receive is increased. Your understanding of patience is transformed. And when the reward finally arrives, it is not always what you imagined. It arrives in a form that takes your breath away. A door that opens where you hadn't even knocked. An inner peace that settles in without any logical explanation. An answer that touches the very wound you never dared name. And it's often at that moment that you realize something profound. Your tears weren't a sign of weakness. They were a language. A language your soul used when the words were no longer enough. A language understood long before the situation changed. If today you feel this strange emotion listening to these words, if your heart aches without knowing why, if you feel as if someone is finally putting words to what you've been carrying in silence, it's not a coincidence. Because invisible tears are often the last signal before a turning point. They appear when the soul has reached a limit, when it can no longer bear this burden alone, when something absolutely must change. And this change doesn't always begin with a visible miracle, but with an inner recognition that you've held on longer than you thought possible, and that this emotional threshold you believe to be an end is often the precise place where the unexpected begins to take shape. Imagine yourself standing in front of a door. You've been waiting for it for a long time. You've knocked. You've waited. You've even planned what you'll do once it opened. In your mind, everything is clear. The shape, the timing, the outcome. And then, instead of opening, the door disappears. In its place, there's nothing familiar. Just a wall, slowly crumbling away, revealing a landscape you never imagined. This is exactly how many breakthroughs manifest. And that's precisely why they're often misunderstood. The human soul loves precise scenarios. It likes to know how things will unfold, in what order, and above all, in what form deliverance will arrive. You ask for a clear outcome to your ordeal, and you expect an answer that resembles what you already know. Something reassuring, something you can explain to others, something that confirms you were right all along. But Allah doesn't liberate according to His servants' mental frameworks. He liberates according to what is right, profound, and aligned with your true path, not the one you imagined. This is where many go wrong. They look at the new reality and they reject it. Not because it's bad, but because it doesn't fit their expectations. You thought the solution would be an improvement on your current situation. But what happens is a complete break. You thought the answer would be quick relief. But what happens is a pseudo-demanding but transformative redirection. You thought you would receive exactly what you asked for, but what happens is something your heart would never have dared to ask for, out of fear. This disconnect creates deep inner confusion. You ask yourself, is this really an answer, or is it just another obstacle? And this is where something very subtle comes into play. Because what you call a detour is often just a path your ego hadn't foreseen. A path where you no longer have as much control. A path where you have to learn to walk without immediate guarantees. But this path contains something the old road didn't offer. Inner expansion. Imagine someone who has always sought stability, without realizing that this stability kept them in a diminished version of themselves. Imagine someone who demands success, without seeing that the kind of success they desire would distance them from their inner peace. Imagine a soul that begs for things to go back to the way they were, when the way they were was precisely what prevented evolution. When Allah changes the form of what you expect, it's not to frustrate you, it's to take you where your gaze has never gone. What happens differently often possesses a greater spiritual intelligence than you had imagined. Because your imagination is fueled by your past, while the divine wisdom operates from your future. You see with what you have already experienced. But the breakthrough operates from what you have not yet discovered within yourself. That's why some blessings arrive in disguise. They begin by making you lose your bearings, by forcing you to abandon your old definitions of success, love, security, and victory. And in this phase, many say, I no longer recognize my life. But the real question is rather, what if you are finally encountering a version of yourself you have never explored? What you hadn't planned might be exactly what your soul needed to breathe again. Not to satisfy an immediate desire, but to heal an old wound. Sometimes, you don't get what you wanted, because what you wanted was too small for what you could become. A breakthrough doesn't just change a situation. It changes your perspective. It alters your relationship with control. It teaches you to trust without understanding everything. And that's where many hesitate. Because following an unexpected path requires a particular kind of courage. The courage to accept no longer being in complete control. This courage isn't spectacular, it's silent. It manifests itself when you move forward despite doubt, when you continue even without certainty, when you choose to believe that what comes your way has meaning, even if it's beyond your comprehension. Now imagine that this crumbling wall wasn't an obstacle, but an illusion that prevented you from seeing further. Imagine that what you perceived as a delay was actually a precise realignment. Imagine that this new direction, however uncomfortable it may be, is the one that will reveal a capacity within you that you never suspected. Because true breakthrough doesn't just give you something. It transforms you so that you can carry what comes next. Why do you feel exhausted, but not empty? Why does your body tell you to stop, while your heart refuses to give up? This weariness you feel isn't that of someone who has lost everything. It's the weariness of someone who has held on too long without yet seeing the shape of what they're waiting for. You're not empty. You're burdened, bound with unspoken expectations, bound with silent prayers, bound with accumulated patience. That's why, despite the exhaustion, a spark remains. Something inside you refuses to go out. Even when you no longer have rational reasons to hope, this strange feeling remains. It's not over. Why is your heart heavy, but strangely calm? Why, amidst inner turmoil, do you sometimes feel a peace you can't explain? Because your heart is beginning to understand something your mind hasn't yet accepted. It senses that some battles are over, even if the consequences remain. It senses that some things won't come back. And for the first time, it's no longer fighting that idea so hard. This heaviness isn't just sadness. It's the weight of a detachment in progress. You're no longer clinging on like you used to. You're no longer begging for everything to go back to the way it was. You feel pain, yes, but you also feel a kind of release. As if your soul were saying, I've carried enough. Now, something else must take over. Why do you have the feeling that something is coming, without knowing what? Why this persistent feeling of waiting without a specific image, without a date, without a form? Because major transitions never begin with external events. They begin with an internal misalignment. Before your situation changes, your perspective changes. Before your life opens up, your attachment patterns transform. Before you receive, you are prepared to let go. You begin to lose your appetite for certain things you once ardently desired. Not because you are no longer capable, but because they no longer nourish the emerging version of yourself. You find yourself no longer reacting the way you used to, no longer seeking validation, no longer forcing your way through certain doors. And this can be frightening, because you ask yourself, if I no longer want what I used to want, who am I becoming? This mix of emotions, tiredness, peace, anticipation, Detachment is not confusion. It's a signal, a sign that your soul is entering an advanced phase of transition, a sign that something has already shifted, even if nothing is yet visible. Many believe that faith manifests itself through clear certainties. But there is a deeper, more mature faith, the kind that moves forward without a precise plan, the kind that trusts even when the path is unclear. Why do you sometimes feel sudden sadness for no apparent reason? Because your soul is mourning certain versions of your life. Not just people or situations, but yourself, as you were before. You are leaving behind identities built on survival, on the fear of lack, on the urgency to prove yourself. And even if these identities protected you for a time, they cannot accompany you any further. Why do you sometimes feel misunderstood, even when surrounded by people? Because you are experiencing an inner transformation that few can see. Others look at you through the lens of old perceptions, while you no longer fully recognize yourself. Why do you feel a calling for greater depth, more sincerity, more inner truth? Because what is coming will require a more grounded version of yourself, more aligned, less scattered. Great breakthroughs are never given to hearts still attached to everything. They require space. And this space is created through questions, not immediate answers. That's why you're asking yourself so many questions right now, not to lose yourself, but to shed your layers. Every question your soul formulates is a layer that falls away. Every sincere doubt is a purification of intention. Every discomfort is an inner adjustment. And when you learn to recognize this signal, not as discomfort, but as preparation, something will change in the way you experience waiting. You will no longer see the unexpected as a threat. You will no longer see it as a risk. You will begin to feel it as a silent promise. A promise not yet expressed through events, but through an intimate certainty that grows slowly. That what you are going through is not a wandering but a journey. And this journey, even if it tires you, even if it shakes you to your core, is precisely what leads you to the place where certain answers are no longer given through words, but through an experience that will soon render these questions unnecessary. If you're still here, still standing, still connected despite everything you've been through, then stop for a moment and fully realize it. It's not over. Not because everything is fine, not because you have all the answers, but because despite the weariness, despite the disappointments, despite the prayers that seem to have remained formless, something within you refused to die. Many would have given up in your place. Many would have closed themselves off, hardened, detached themselves from all spiritual expectation. Many would have let bitterness take over. But you're still here. Even if you sometimes doubt, even if you're moving more slowly, even if your faith is no longer what it once was. And that precisely is the sign that your story hasn't reached its final chapter. There is a very particular moment in the spiritual life, that moment when one is no longer sustained by enthusiasm, but by a silent, inner faithfulness. You no longer do things to feel something immediately. You continue because your soul knows that turning away now would be a far greater loss than waiting. The very fact that your heart reacts to these words is not insignificant. Something within you is listening with a different intensity, not with curiosity, with gratitude. As if a part of you were saying, finally, someone is putting words to what I'm experiencing. It's no coincidence that this message resonates with you now. Not a year ago, not later, now. Because this kind of resonance only appears when something is already in motion within you. Not tomorrow, not when things get better, but now, in this invisible space, where profound decisions are made silently. When Allah says, it is time to celebrate, He is not always referring to an immediate external event. He is not necessarily referring to a visible success or a dramatic change that everyone will applaud. Sometimes, celebration begins with an inner certainty. A certainty that doesn't shout, that doesn't seek to convince, that doesn't justify itself. It settles in gently, almost discreetly, like a faint but steady light deep within the heart. You don't yet know how. You don't yet know when. But you know that something is coming. And this certainty is different from the naive hope you had before. It is no longer a feverish anticipation. It is no longer an impatient desire. It is a strange tranquility, as if your soul has received information that your mind has not yet processed. You continue to live your life. You continue to manage your responsibilities. But internally, something has shifted. You're no longer in survival mode. You're in availability mode. Available for what you hadn't planned. Available for a transformation that may not flatter your ego, but that will deeply nourish your being. There's a big difference between being broken and being reshaped. Being broken empties you, closes you off, makes you distrustful. Being transformed, even if it hurts, opens you up, expands you, deepens you. And what you've been through lately wasn't meant to diminish you. It stripped you bare, yes. It tired you, yes. But it didn't extinguish you. On the contrary, it removed the superficial layers. It shattered the illusions. It revealed what, within you, is independent of circumstances. And now, you've reached a very delicate point. A point where the old no longer satisfies you, but where the new isn't yet fully visible. This is where many misinterpret what they're feeling. They think they're lost, when they're actually between two states. They think they're behind, when they're realigning. This moment is uncomfortable because it requires you to remain present without guarantees, to continue without excitement, to trust without a clear plan, but it's precisely this moment that precedes the most profound transformations. The unexpected in question isn't necessarily what you've been asking for from the beginning. It's often what will enable you to carry what you've been asking for a long time. It doesn't come to confirm your old expectations. He comes to lift you beyond. And that's why he doesn't make a sound when he arrives. He begins within, in your way of seeing, in your way of reacting, in your relationship to control. You're no longer in a hurry like before. You're no longer desperate like before. You're attentive. And this new attentiveness is a very clear sign. You're entering a phase where every detail counts, where every inner choice has an impact, where every intuition becomes more refined. It's not over. But what happens won't be like what you imagined at the beginning of the journey. Because you're no longer the same person you were when you first started asking. And this gap between what you once expected and what you are ready to receive now is precisely where something very specific begins to fall into place. Something that isn't fully manifesting yet, but which asks one last essential thing of you. Remain open, even without understanding. Remain confident, even without immediate proof. Remain present, now that you've reached this point where the old version of you can no longer continue, but where the new one hasn't yet fully taken its place. If this message has touched your heart, it's for a reason. Sometimes, simply hearing these words is already an inner confirmation. So take a moment. Tell me in the comments what you're feeling right now. Is it an expectation, a trial, a change, or a breakthrough that you can't yet understand? If you know someone going through a period of silence, confusion, or spiritual fatigue, share this video with them. You could be the means by which a heart finds hope again. And if you want to continue receiving these kinds of profound reminders which speak to the soul and rekindle faith, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the next message you hear will be exactly what you needed, at the precise moment you needed it.